A very good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight on the agenda. My name is Toivo Njabela. Tonight on the show, we are joined by Ritter. He is an independent analyst who closely monitors public enterprises, in particular in our country, the governance issues there, what can be done better, and he's just here on the platform tonight to share with us his take on different issues regarding that. Thank you, Rainer, for making time. It's really a pleasure. Yeah. What is your general, maybe to start with, your general take on the state of public enterprises in our country?
Toivo, when the government appointed a minister with, in that sense, Mr. Jooste, or previously Honorable Jooste as a minister,
yeah.
I think it was a very good decision to have a separate ministry for public enterprise. Because normally in the past, as you know, also there were a lot of interference from line ministries, and which became seen as political also interference. And with a separate ministry which appoints directors, I mean the directors are in the end also approved by cabinet, but you had a different ministry looking just at public enterprises, and because public enterprises lost a lot of money, and we, Namibia, the taxpayer, spent a lot of money to keep them afloat.
Yes.
I think it was a good move to have a separate ministry.
Yeah. I think because a lot of people are saying now it has been made. The public enterprises is now a directorate within the Ministry of Finance, and the Minister of Finance really. A lot of people are saying he should be focused on. His mandate is just too big already, just with the finance mandate. So now having public enterprises also it makes it a bit difficult for him in terms of the workload.
Yes, that's also my view. I concur with you. I believe personally that the Ministry of Public Enterprises should have been still separate from the workload, only also from the workload, and it needs a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And because it's often political also, you have to have a strong person in charge of that ministry, who's without fear and favor steering the ship.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the current minister is not without fear and favor, but I think he's got a lot of other issues at hand, and I believe it should have been still a ministry.
Yeah. You spoke about Leon Jooste, the former Minister of Public Enterprises. When we had that ministry as an independent ministry, solely focused on public enterprises, what sort of improvements or trajectory did you see emerging?
I did see an improvements. Firstly, if you look at the trend of, if you analyze all the profits and losses and combine them of state-owned enterprises, there was an improvement from 2015 when he became minister. Although the economy was not so much in a good shape, but there was an improvement. And the reason why there was an improvement is from an administration point of view, on governance point of view, the ministry required state-owned enterprises to submit, they call it ISPPs, integrated strategic business plans for the next 5 years, which forced boards and companies to look at the next 5 years, submit it and get approval from the ministry.
Yeah.
And annual reports have to be submitted to the minister, then financial statements are submitted, and when there are problems they have first discussions with the ministry before they go to discuss it with line ministries. And that was a focused approach to governance of state-owned enterprises. Database was set up. Previously we didn't have a consolidated database, which there is now a consolidated database. So, and then the PEGA Act came into force in 2019, the Public Enterprise Governance Act,
Yeah.
and which improved the governance of state-owned enterprises.
Yeah. One of the biggest developments in the SOE space that occurred during that period was the closure of Air Namibia.
Yes.
And it has divided opinion, but government seems to have been really determined to go ahead with that plan. What do you make of that?
My personal view is that there was, because you have to look at Air Namibia from the end of the 90s already.
Yeah.
As you can recall, we had a former governor of our central bank who became the CEO of Air Namibia.
Yeah.
So you had a number of appointments as CEOs and board members over the years, which were not experts in the air industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's wrong. You know, you shouldn't appoint somebody who you know or who's a nice guy at Air Namibia, because the air industry or the air travel industry is a totally separate industry which needs experts.
Yeah.
And one can see it from Air Ethiopia, which is the only African airline which is big now and in existence, and it is even sometimes better than European or American airlines. Mm. And it's a management factor, how you manage an airline. And in the case of Namibia, we made many mistakes with, I think, appointing the wrong people in positions, appointing the wrong people on the boards, and often it was also with seemingly political connections. You know this guy, and then you appoint him on the board.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. You know, the airline industry need experts.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of money, because you also referred to taxpayers' money being put into these enterprises. And Air Namibia was one of the leading recipients of public funds. And so many turnaround proposals came out of that, but none seem to have really worked. Apart from the appointments that you mentioned, do you think things like, because there's also this theory that, you know, there was a lot of interference from state actors, that the airline was forced to take routes that were really senseless, and that eventually it just really fell on his knees? Yes.
Can you recall when, I think, Air Namibia was tasked to fly to Ghana? It came like an instruction.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wrote a paper, not for public consumption, in 2005 on Air Namibia. And if you benchmark at that time already Air Namibia against international airlines like, say, Lufthansa or South African Airways at that time, and if you benchmark them, there was one main issue. You had a few planes and many employees.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you look at the ratio between one plane and how many employees you've got on the ground for the organization, then you knew already that there are about 350 employees too many for Air Namibia. Yeah, yeah. And then you need, as a politician and cabinet, you have to take tough decisions. Either you cut down drastically and make it a profitable business. And in that sense, if you look at the history of Air Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government never interfered in Air Ethiopia. It's also government shareholding, but they don't interfere. Yeah. And let experts run the show, be in a management position, and then you can have a good airline.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a big also political decision in Namibia, because, you know, it's a national flag.
Pride. It's a national pride.
It's a national pride, and you know, it had to be done. Do you think that because we are hearing from time to time that a new, leaner national airline might be created. Is it necessary? Is it important to have a national airline? I mean, the USA, for example, doesn't have one, if I recall correctly. Is it an absolute must that a country must have a national airline?
No, it's not a must. It's more of a pride issue. I remember when I was studying in Switzerland that Swiss Air was bankrupt and they were bought by Lufthansa.
Yeah.
And I think in 2020, Air Italia also went bust in COVID times.
Yeah.
So I don't believe an airline has to be a national airline owned by government.
Yeah.
There's no need for it. If there's a demand for tourism and flights, the planes will fly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good. That last point is important. The planes will fly because this is what I see. Look, I say, for example, that because there was this whole thing. We no longer have Air Namibia. We will not. It will affect tourism, and I can't imagine anyone in Europe who have set their mind on coming to Namibia that the absence of a particular airline would make them change their plan. They will still find a way to come here.
Yes, they look at convenience and cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they fly.
Absolutely.
And I understand, when there's a demand, we saw it after COVID, then suddenly planes come and register and they fly.
Yeah. So one of the key hot topics in the SOE space right now is around governance, and we don't seem to be getting it right many a time. So there's a big issue, big debate now also around Namcor.
Yes.
Our national oil company. We are told, the MD is on suspension right now. The board has issues. Chairperson accused of drug possession, drug charges now that are in court. They got an extension for 6 months. Just too many issues around it. What is your reading of the situation at Namcor?
At Namcor, when we look at the history of Namcor, why it was established and so on, it was established to be more in the upstream oil sector. When we have exploration of oil licenses and so on. It was a small outfit. And then when Mr. Björkes was the CEO, they had the grand idea of being a role player in importing fuel. And he made substantial losses, and the government had to intervene and pay hefty many millions in funds to save Namcor. Then Namcor was really stabilized, and in 2015 Mr. Mulunga came into the seat as a driver and CEO of Namcor. And the idea came also to have go into the retail downstream. That means establishing in the private sector, the private sector, we have got filling stations in this country. Yeah. And they decided, no, we have to enter this market and in competition with the private sector. And they established filling stations, and one is at the airport, and you hardly see any car at the airport. And then the fuel storage saga also came to that, where Namibia paid about 7 billion for fuel storage. And they got this under their knee, and then there was an intention, I don't know who gave them the green light, to become a major player in all sectors. Mm-hmm. So the turnover increased substantially. But one must always forget, and that's what the public doesn't see often, is Namcor is always subsidized. They get funding from the ministry, from the fuel fund. It's about 84 million now a year. I understand that they want to stop it. but it's a subsidy, 84 million a year, which is a substantial subsidy. And so when they decided to go into the fuel business in a big scale again, you have to understand the fuel business. Yeah. It's a low margin business. And I think they misjudged themselves in that sense, because in a low margin business, you don't need often so high operating costs as they have. If you look at the operating costs of the other oil companies here, they are not as high as Namcor. And then when the oil asset was on the table, very, according to documents, a very lucrative proposition, you must ask yourself as a board, and I must say the board is also must look at it from a strategic point of view. You must look at the board. Firstly, if you get an asset which the shareholding in Zungara of Namibia is 1/3, it's 33%, and Zungara will have then in the more than $500 million investment. It's about $8 billion Namibian dollar investment in Angola offshore, and you have to pay upfront money to get the license, and this has an impact on your cash flow. Right. Now, the first thing also is, did Namcor seek written approval from Treasury? I mean, if you make a 8 billion investment in an offshore in Angola, why, you know, it's a substantial sum, and Namcor is owned by government. So you need to be sure what you are doing. And from a cash flow perspective, if you then suddenly say, okay, the other guys, Sequa, didn't pay up, and Petrolog also didn't pay an amount which they require to pay on a certain date, and you pay for them, and you do it without board approval, I think you put the onus on yourself, because at least if you have got a board approval for that, the board can not say you get a board approval. But if you don't have a board approval for these payments, I think then it's, from a governance perspective, a serious matter. Although some views are he saved this deal, but from a cash flow perspective, it's serious, very serious. And because you are in a very low margin business, it has an impact on cash flow. And if you understand now what's happening in the market at the moment, Namcor has got no funding to import fuel.
Yeah. What scares me right now about the Angolan oil deal, apart from the governance issues, of course, is that it's really the cash flow, as you mentioned it, because I think the amount that the deposit is much, much lower than the substantive amount that is needed now to complete the deal. Yes. And as far as I understand, I think July, my sources told me that July was actually the last month to now pay up everything. And we are in August now. We haven't heard of any movement in that regard. So I suppose those of us in journalism must find out what is the latest in that regard, but it's really a lot of money.
Yes, you know, they had to fund about $400 million, and according to various sources, there were some institutions prepared to pay, and it's mentioned Zungara and Vitol, Trafigura and Vitol. But on the other hand, they are also suppliers of fuel to Namcor, so there could be a conflict of interest. On the one hand, that they want to fund the deal, and on the other hand, they are also suppliers of fuel to Namcor. But from a governance perspective and from the whole deal, the whole Namcor deal, to say it diplomatically, stinks.
Yeah, sure. I hear you. We go for a quick break and then return with Ritter.
Neopaints has established a 67-year Namibian legacy, creating personalized paint solutions that blend quality and innovation for the Namibian people. We pride ourselves in being a 100% Namibian-owned company, investing in our country and our people by employing and empowering true Namibians. With every brushstroke, Neopaints commits to our quality guarantee and always delivering a coat of excellence. At Neopaints, we always stay true to our country. We are as Namibian as you.
Good evening and welcome to Sunset News.
Dutch states on list A in his speech, rate in taxes, and how much.
After the break, we take a look at the sports.
We bring you
economic indicators, tomorrow's weather, and sports. I am Aina Raiza Kweyom.
We continue our conversation. Rainer, this oil finds, the discovery of oil, what could it do to the fortunes of Namcor going forward?
Because Namcor is a shareholder in the two finds, they've got a 10% shareholding. So it will be a substantial inflow of funds once the oil companies decide to commercialize the finds. That means pumping out the oil. But that will be after 2030. So this good thing for our economy is still future music.
Yeah,
it's not a reality at the moment, but to my understanding, it will be substantial, very substantial. These oil finds, and they're very good. The oil finds,
yeah.
And I think it will be like the diamonds in the 50s, where the diamonds dictated to the economy of Namibia,
Yeah.
As major source of tax, major source of export. Oil will be that. The energy sector will be that,
Yeah.
from 2030 onwards.
And have you been following the debate around, the Namibian stake in these oil blocks? People saying 10% is very small. I had Tom Alwendo here last year, and he was saying that if all things put together, actually Namibia will still benefit quite a lot than what it appears on paper. What are your views on that?
Yes, my view is a 10% is already a good stake. The higher the stake of Namcor, because Namcor cannot contribute as a shareholder. They don't have funds to contribute as a shareholder. So if you've got a 10% stake, already you are because the exploration costs are substantial. Normally the shareholders, commit substantial funds, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of US dollars to contribute to the exploration. And it is not always that you find something. You are a 10% shareholder, and then you also don't pay anything. But there's nothing, and the other partners have to pay for the exploration costs,
Yeah.
which we had already in the past. Now suddenly you've got two finds with Shell and Total, and they are a 10% shareholder, and so there's oil, and suddenly one has an argument, is 10% not enough?
Yeah.
But previously when you make losses, and then the argument didn't come up.
Yeah.
But you must remember that to attract foreign investors, if you have a major shareholding, say 30% or 40%, and you don't contribute anything, just the others have to contribute. You will find less investors being prepared to do the exploration.
Yeah. Yeah. You've also written quite extensively very solid papers on the situation at Meatco. What are the issues there?
The Meatco issue is they didn't see the sign of the times. You know, they had a quasi-monopoly up to 2010, when they had about 80% of the total slaughtering in Namibia was 80%. And like the oil business, like the fuel business, the meat business is also a very low margin business. And then Meatco became politicized also. You know, if you recall the debates, should the producers have a shareholding and not? And then the government was not clear on that. And in 2014, the farmers, the producers wanted a shareholding, and then the government said no. Or, you know, the whole issue of ownership was an issue. But the whole problem started was when Koos, was a CEO who was not from the meat industry. You need a CEO who's experienced with the meat industry. When you had your initial phase of Meatco in the 90s and up to about 2010, you had experienced CEOs who were really knowing the industry. And then this has changed. What is also not often said is that Meatco subsidized, so to speak, the function in the NCA that is north of the red line. Yeah. They used the funding from their own, and up to 2017, about 400 million of the funds of Meatco were used to develop the NCA. Yeah. But you know yourself, and since 2016, the government slashed funding especially in many sectors of the economy because of the budget deficit. And Meatco couldn't also fund it anymore. And then in 2020, then the new CEO was appointed, Mushu. He was previously on the board of Meatco, but he also has got no meat industry experience as a CEO, no meat. He's got master's degrees, yes, but no meat industry experience. And that is, I think that is a governance and management quality problem, Meatco. Because when you have a downturn and you lose market share because other companies came into the market, like Beefco and Okahandja, and they are profitable. When you realize you're losing market share, you cut operational costs to the bone. And that's, I think, always there where politics come into effect. If you have your operational costs are too high, in the case of Meatco, they are too high for the number of cattle they slaughter, you have to cut down. You have to cut down your operational costs tremendously, 50, 60 million to be profitable again. That's how the private sector operates. And then operate. But state-owned enterprises, they ask always funds from the government, have a political argument, and say this and this, and it's in the national interest, and that and that.
Jobs.
But you have to look at your, and there are state-owned enterprises like Satcom, for instance, which falls under the August 26 group, which are operating. And when you got problems, they slashed operating costs drastically, and they are profitable now. And that's how you should manage in business.
Do you think the key difference between the way the state runs its businesses and the private sector, of course I get the understanding that government has a bigger social responsibility, but I sense a lot of sentimentalism in running these entities, and sentimental principles have actually let down these entities, because people say, oh, but if we close down, or if we reduce the operations, it could result in job losses and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, so much money get put into these entities, and
Yes.
and they're bottomless pits. Do you think that government need to be a bit more business-minded, a bit, maybe not the right word, but a bit more brutal in really running these entities?
Yes, much tougher on state-owned enterprises. We are much too relaxed because we always think the taxpayer can pay for it.
Yeah.
And that's, in the end, what we are doing. I mean, look at TransNamib, for instance. TransNamib is a problem child since the last 15 years. And we don't come with a stick and say, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Like in the case of Air Namibia, the political pressure was later so high because the funding was later 4 billion Namibian dollars over a number of years, which you have to subsidize Air Namibia. And then cabinet came to senses and said, enough is enough. We cannot entertain this Air Namibia anymore. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, it always comes too late. Often there are signs already, in early signs, when a state-owned enterprise is going for the loop.
Yeah.
And then when you see these signs, you have to have a tough hand and take action.
Yeah. Do you think, Rainer, that because there's also talks of PPPs or complete privatization of some of these entities, so that the state can really focus on state business, the conventional state business, is it advisable for the state to be in active business like it is at the moment?
No. And I believe, for instance, there's a room, it might sound funny, but there's a room in TransNamib to have partnerships with the private sector, and to get the private sector involved in TransNamib.
Yeah.
And I give you various examples. In Canada, for instance, you've got 2 listed companies who are in the railway sector in Canada. In the US, you've got more than 6, but 4 listed on the New York Stock Exchange, who are all in the railway sector, operating, private companies operating the railway system in the US. Deutsche Bahn in Germany is listed on the stock exchange.
Yeah.
The government can have a shareholding, yes, by all means, but it must be run not at the expense always of the taxpayer, these businesses.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of TransNamib, the suggestion for PPPs has been doing rounds for many years, but I think the counter argument has always been that the liabilities are just too many. So it's a very risky opportunity to take. Are they in a position at all where are they an attractive proposition?
I think only certain rail lines where there's a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
If you've got a partnership, for instance, with the line Windhoek, Walvis Bay, and Tsumeb, Walvis Bay, you can make a proposition. Because if you recall, we have currently about 1 million tons per year on the railway line, and in 82 we are standing at 4 million. So in 82, that's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
40 years ago, we had 4 times more traffic on the railway line, and the economy has grown. There's a lot of more traffic, it's on the roads. But if you get the private sector involved, I think you will move also traffic back to the railway line.
Yeah. I mean, there are examples like MTC now who want to shed, the state want to shed its equities in that. They've been put up on the stock markets and stuff like that.
Yes.
Is that, must we see more of that? The state, sort of saying, look, let private players come into these entities and take that leading role, bringing finances, bringing expertise, and we as a government really focus on the government duties?
In certain sectors, yes, I think that you can invite the private sector to do things. For instance, with MTC dominates the market. You know that Namibians there's hardly any opposition to MTC.
Yeah.
And there were surveys done when it comes to costing, that our surveys for handies and the costs are very high in comparison to other countries where there's competition. So competition is always good to keep also prices low for the consumer.
Yeah.
And in the case of MTC, it's a known brand, and they've got substantial market share. So I think there's way to open up so that people, because the government, why should the government provide cell phone service? Yeah,
But that is where the debate is, because, for example, when government started showing signs of wanting to reduce its stake in MTC, which is a profitable entity, they are getting so much money in dividends, and people want to juxtapose that with the likes of TransNamib, which makes losses, and they are saying, this cash cow, which is really important in the context of state finances, why would you want to reduce your stake in that cash cow instead of actually doing that with lesser attractive entities?
If you recall, when MTC had shareholders up to 2017, I think, from Portugal, they sold out the 35%. But if you compare when you had them, the growth in revenue of MTC from the time when it started and when they went out as shareholder, the growth in revenue is not that dynamic anymore. Mm-hmm. So once you have private shareholders who are also managing a business, you have innovation, you have new businesses, new business ideas, which is often in state-owned enterprises not the case.
Yeah, I understand. We go for the last break before we come to finish off with Ritter.
eTicket, your online ticket solution for events and event marketing, bringing you ease of mind and making sure that your event gets out there. For more information, contact events@nhh.com.na.
Welcome to What's Cooking, where culinary passion meets expert insights.
somebody must really want to cook and want to cook good food.
Immerse yourself in the bustling world of professional kitchens as top chefs create mouthwatering dishes. Join us for in-depth interviews as our host explores the experiences and expertise of our guest chefs. Don't miss out. Tune in to What's Cooking on NTV every Friday at 2100 hours and let the culinary adventure begin.
The conversation continues on the agenda. The other issue now, Raina, is obviously how much do you think political interference has disadvantaged our public enterprises, just in general, because that happens a lot?
Yes, Toivo, but it starts with a selection of directors of a business. You know, whom do you appoint on a board? Now, normally, if you look at very good managed companies, international companies, you've got expertise appointed on boards who've got expertise relevant to the industry they are appointed to. And say, for instance, the case of Meatco. The acting chair, he's a communal farmer from the Kwango region. Now, you can also, if you are serious about governance, you know, when I was head of Namfisa, I had the former FSB Financial Services Board CEO, who retired in South Africa. He was on the Namfisa. I asked that he becomes on the Namfisa board. The reason is because we think in Namibia always we know everything, and that's not the case. We don't hardly know anything. So sometimes it's even good to have from neighboring countries or from other countries board members who bring their expertise to that industry. And although that is maybe expensive in the scene as when they get their board fees, it helps to get a perspective of what is going outside the country. In the business, say for instance MTC. You can have, say, a very good professional person who knows telecommunication industry, mobile telecommunication, and appoint him on the board, and he comes not from Namibia, but just to be on the board of MTC and to assist with strategy and what we can do. And that's, I think, where we are too proud, and rather as Namibians, we are too proud about that. We always think we have got all the expertise in this country. And then you also appoint people who are loyal, often. Loyal, don't rock the boat. Don't have different views. Loyal to the system. And that's expensive then.
Yeah, it's a very important point that you raised, because that was going to be my next question around the exclusion of people who have skills for simply not being in the database of the ruling party as members. Really top professionals, but once you enter the party database, membership database, and their name doesn't pop up, somehow they don't make it to those boards. And then you staff the board with people, like you said, who are loyal, not rocking the boat, singing praises. Really backward, some of them, not all of them. There are a few good ones, but a lot of them very backward in their thinking.
Yes, no, that's true. And that's when I studied corporate governance in Switzerland, my Professor Martin Hilp always said, garbage in, garbage out. So, and that's a very telling short sentence, because once you appoint not the best on the board, you also have a problem from a governance perspective. And if you can recall, for instance, you had in the past, where say Harold Papkewitz was on the board of Telecom. I don't know if you remember when he was still alive.
Yeah.
Many business people who would make good board members are afraid because of all the last 10 years on governance at state-owned enterprises. People are also afraid to be members of a board because they don't want to be their name drawn into issues. I mean, the experience where at Namcor, for instance, where you have a board meeting at Namcor, and suddenly the police comes and finds drugs in your cars. And it's, the circumstances point towards that there is some more to this issue than only that some tip-off comes with that drugs are in the car. And then people don't want to be board members anymore. You can also not blame them, because that's then politics, which comes into play.
Yeah. One controversial issue that gets said a lot in social circles, I don't know whether there's proof for it, is every time a public entity is struggling or goes down, like in the case of Air Namibia, they went down, and then we saw the rise, the establishment essentially, and the rise of Fly Namibia. At Meatco, there are problems there. We see now Beefco and others, Savannah Beef, coming up. And those trends have always led to speculations of white cartels. People saying, yeah, it's a white cartel. Government officials are being duped into subjudicating these entities so that white cartels or businesses can rise. Is there any truth in anything like that in your observation?
No, there's no truth. Beefco is owned by white people, yes, but there are about 18 abattoirs, which are not export abattoirs. You know, you get an abattoir in Uchu, in Windhoek you've got smaller abattoirs, and they came into existence because Meatco was not functioning. Yeah. So once a state-owned enterprise is not functioning, investors make a plan to see the gap and say, okay, we can provide a better service. And that's precisely what happened with TransNamib. You know, at independence, TransNamib had about 177 locomotives which were functioning. And currently they have 32 locomotives, and I think about 14 are functioning. Now, from 177 to 14 functioning locomotives, that's a massive decline. And the private sector, if you want to fuel, say, for instance, from Walvis Bay to Windhoek, and it takes 2 days and you don't know if they derail or, and you got a truck who's doing it perfectly in time, they say, we even pay more, we just know we get our fuel. So that's, also when it comes to Air Namibia, there were many rumors that the former Minister of State-owned Enterprises is involved there as a shareholder and so on, and he took a decision to close Air Namibia because his business partners are there. These rumors, and they are just rumors, because he's not a shareholder in Fly Namibia, and so that's. But unfortunately, the rumors, and one must maybe write about it, about these rumors. Are they true or not? As a newspaper, but it's just a rumor.
Yeah, wonderful. I think in closing then, Rainer, the 2024, there are elections. The country is desperately looking for a leader that can take us forward in all aspects of life. unemployment is skyrocketing. People believe that if we invest wisely into growth sectors, that maybe we can get jobs going again. If you can give me your take on, I mean, of course you don't have to go into names, but I mean, what is the template? What is that leader that we need to really take us forward? Because the country has resources, the country has potential, but we are stuttering.
Yes. Okay, that's a difficult question of not mentioning names.
I'll be happy if you mention a name.
Yes.
I'll be happy.
What I sense from all the candidates who are speaking loudly on the issue, the current incumbent of SWAPO, Netumbo Ndaitwa, she said she's got sleepless nights because of unemployment. And if a leader has got sleepless nights of unemployment, you know already her priorities. And that will be unemployment, I think, a priority. The other issue which she mentioned was, corruption is a big issue. And I think under her leadership that will be addressed. Corruption, Dr. Itula from the IPC always mentions also corruption, that this is a big issue. But the tone by Mrs. Honorable Netumbo as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister, the tone, I think, is a reconciliatory tone. And from a political point of view, you need trust to get the economy going. Currently, that's, I think, one of the issues is there's a lack of trust. Between people, lack of trust in government, by the private sector. And if you establish trust and transparency, and if you fight corruption and provide leadership in that direction, I think Namibia will have a good future. But you have to be tough. I think you have to take tough decisions. And I don't know if anybody who will have got the stamina to take these tough decisions, but it means, for instance, that you would say we privatize partly TransNamib, which is politically, maybe in some corners, not acceptable. But you have to take these tough decisions and say, for the good of the country, get some pain in the beginning, but in the end you have got a rainbow.
Wonderful. Rainer, thank you very much for making time.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. That is Rainer Ritter, is an independent analyst, just really sharing with us his views on a variety of issues around governing public enterprises. Thank you for watching.
We are so excited to be kickstarting your morning with the entertainment.
Everything was happening during this past weekend.
Yes.
Exciting news.
Wow, no, she was killing it already.
In my opinion, I don't see anything wrong with him serving the full term.
As well as keeping you informed on the issues that you need to know happening in and around our country.